Welcome to the program. Chris Alley joins me. He is a professor in the Department of Media Studies at the University of Virginia. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
I want to start with the elephant in the room as far as media studies goes, journalism, media. The entire nation has been riveted by video that was either recorded or live streamed of episodes that are taking place either with police, protests. It's a new world. It is just absolutely fascinating. So I'm just curious how you see this as somebody who studies the media, the use of technology, journalism. I'm curious what crosses your mind, Chris, when you see this kind of stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and it's something that we're daily confronted with, for better or for worse, most times for worse these days. A couple things that spring to mind about this are things like privacy, are things like safety and legality. I mean, is it legal for someone to record a police officer? The answer is yes. So long as you're not interfering with their duties, you can record police officers acting under official capacity. The idea of live streaming, though, is also really interesting.
Which is what the woman was doing in the car in St. Paul, Minnesota, when her boyfriend was shot and killed, sitting in the seat next to her.
Absolutely.
She was live streaming that to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the same thing when we get the kind of, maybe not live streaming, with the live footage out of, you know, what just happened in Nice, France the other day as well. So it does change. It creates a situation of much more accountability, but it's also a reversing kind of the surveillance culture we have. It's no longer just the powerful surveilling us, but it's also we have the ability to surveil and monitor those in power.
Sort of empowering tools that empower the citizenry.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's worked in that it's exposed a lot of deficiencies in our legal system, in our kind of national security complex. So it's a brave new world out there. But I think the other interesting thing is that it raises an interesting ethical question as well in terms of bystanders. Is it enough? And I'm not speaking specifically about live streaming, but just the recording of an event, a recording of a crisis. Is it enough that, am I doing my civic duty by recording rather than intervening? So if I see somebody being beaten up on the street and I record it and say, I'm doing my civic duty because I'm recording this, is it helping more than if I helped that person? And that's a really interesting kind of media ethics question.
Right, yeah, which photojournalists have been grappling with for many years.
Absolutely.
But now the average citizen with a camera phone is faced with the same ethical dilemma.
I mean, one of the things I was struck with watching some of the footage of France this week was even that kind of bird's eye footage of the truck, you still saw people holding their phones up. Now, does that compromise their own safety? Should they be running instead of recording? But then also, what are our ethical obligations to help in these situations as well? This is obviously a personal decision, and we don't have a ton of research on this yet. So this is also an opportunity for media studies scholars, to kind of think about these things and ask these really tough, but really basic questions about morality and ethics with these new digital technologies.
And it's fascinating as with any new technology, we're struggling to figure this stuff out in real time as we go, and it's like the sort of stuttering of the future in the present moment. As we try to figure out where does this fit into our daily lives, how does this fit into our daily lives, and I guess it's just undeniable the sheer numbers of cameras now that are out there in the world, in people's hands, that, you know, I've interviewed old photographers who, you know, back in the 40s or the 50s, the only guy in town with a camera. It has changed so rapidly and so dramatically. And of course, journalism is one of those areas in which this is really changing, because people are able to bring this news into the fore. And it's almost like you don't even need to call the local TV station or newspaper anymore. You just put it on YouTube or Facebook.
Well, I mean, this is the rise of the citizen journalist, which has always existed. I mean, Ben Franklin, we could call Ben Franklin a citizen journalist at one point, right? But so the citizen journalist has always existed, but the kind of the heightened awareness of these people who identify as journalists, citizen journalists, but you know, it has been really interesting. What is the role of the professional journalist? Now, I argue that we still, you know, professional journalism brings with it an important ethical code, kind of a method code, a moralistic code, a narrative understanding, ideas of bias and things like that that confront citizen journalists. But yeah, you know, it's a brave new world for the professional journalist as well in terms of redefining their role.
Yeah.
When this happens, but also, like, who is a citizen journalist? If I Snapchat something happening, does that immediately make me a citizen journalist or just a social media user? You know, who gets to define what? And then that has really important questions for things like protection of journalists in times of conflict or crisis, right? We've got conventions that say you can't kill journalists.
Right.
Do those
Or you're
protections?
supposed to not to.
You're not
Yeah.
supposed to, right? Do those protections extend to someone who's self-identified as a citizen journalist, rather than has like the press credentials?
And not just killing, but you know, we saw in Baton Rouge reports of the police arresting journalists who were, you know, credentialed journalists who were trying to cover the protests against the police killing there. But you also have citizen journalists right next to them, and the police said, if you don't have credentials, we're going to arrest you.
Absolutely.
Which is really fascinating. That's exactly what you're talking about. Where do we draw the line?
Definitely. Where do we draw the line? And how does one identify oneself to an authority like the police as I am here in a journalistic capacity versus I'm here recording this on my phone for another reason? I mean, there's, you know, and this is like you were saying, this is one of the times when we've not been able to catch up with the development of technology. Laws haven't caught up, policies haven't caught up.
No, they haven't. And that's the kind of stuff that you specifically study is how do laws and regulations respond to these changing technologies?
Right, and you know, things like protection of sources. Do those laws encompass citizen journalists? If they have a confidential source, can they be subpoenaed in a court of law to have to reveal their source?
And it's a real spectrum too, from the the professional journalist with credentials who's at the Washington Post or at CNN, and then somebody who holds up a phone. I can really see a civil liberties argument that the citizen who holds up the phone in that moment does take on some of the power of a journalist. They are documenting whatever moment it happens to be. They are documenting that for their fellow citizens.
Yeah, and there are some states that do have laws in place to protect the citizen journalist, but again, this is not uniform. Right, so it might be begging for a Supreme Court case at some point that this is how we're going to define who a citizen journalist is. Is it about intent? Is it about context? Is it about location? Is it about technology? You know, do I need to have an audio and video device to make me a citizen journalist? What if I'm just taking notes? What if I publish it 3 months later because I realized I had this footage and I kind of forgot I had it in the
And we
first
have to figure this out because you and I both know this stuff is only going to become more omnipresent and easier. Right now you've got to reach for the phone, you've got to log in, press a few buttons, and you've got to go through. It'll be instantaneous.
What happens if I can just tap my glasses? And
or tap your temple.
Or tap my temple.
I mean, that's coming too.
You know, like these kind of bio implants, right?
Of course.
That can, and what happens if it's streamed live versus does a journalist have to be someone who tells a story, or rather can you just be dumping data being video or audio or so have you on the net or on your blog? Does that make you, is it the product that
and
makes
we've seen professional journalists do both. Package a prepared story with video and just the breaking news format where you're just live streaming, hey, we're dumping. With whatever technology you're using to receive this, we're just dumping it to you. Here it is in real time.
Yeah, and I mean, the technology changes the professional journalist as well. I mean, is it about being first or is it about being right? And that's a call that editors and news directors, everyone's got to make these calls for themselves. Because if you're first, sometimes you're not always right? Because you're just reporting as you go along. So is it better to take a step back and say we're going to comment at the end, or we're going to process this, or is it just we got to get information out now via the devices that
And
we
the
can.
fascinating thing about it is we've seen that, speaking of being first, that the breaking news, that news now breaks on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's the
Oh, yeah.
first place.
Yeah.
I mean, if
Yeah.
there's a crisis going on in the world or there's breaking news, you want to open Twitter.
Yeah.
Because that's where you're going to see it first.
Definitely. I'm not going to Facebook or Instagram for breaking news. You know,
Right.
you know, things like when Theresa May in the United Kingdom appointed Boris Johnson as a foreign secretary, that was breaking news. Or even what was going on in France, or Donald Trump about whether or not who his vice president would be. These are things that get broken on Twitter, and probably simultaneously, if it's really important, will get broken on the air.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So does all of this, you say we still need professional journalists. It doesn't obviate the profession of journalism and commentary of experienced journalists, punditry, the good kind, I would say, that I enjoy. And there's a value to it.
Of course.
Somebody who has incredible experience in a certain area. I would like to hear from them. It doesn't push that to the side, and yet over the next few decades, I'm convinced, we're only going to see an increasing power and presence of the citizen journalist as well, because the tools will get so much easier.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of happened as a perfect storm, that as we're seeing a decline in the revenue of kind of legacy or traditional journalism, television, print, radio, right? This kind of institutions. As we're seeing that decline, so we're seeing a lot of institutions pull back. Now we're also seeing this rise in the citizen journalists. It's happening simultaneously, and they're both, of course, related to the advent of these kind of digital technologies. So both are having to adapt, and I would agree. I don't think the citizen journalist, and even I hope not, that the citizen journalist would ever replace the professional journalist, although there are a lot of people who say, you know, we don't need the journalist anymore, right? We'll just crowdsource everything.
Right.
But it's you know, like we've said, it's a brave new world for this thing we are calling journalism.
Yeah, yeah.
And
which, for those who, you and I and other students of the history of journalism, we know it has always been changing.
Yes.
It's never been static.
Yeah.
It's always been evolving and changing based on whatever tools that someone engaged in this pursuit or this became a profession might have access to. The technology always shapes it and changes it, and it's always evolving.
And I think we've forgotten that, though. I think that we've forgotten that journalism has not always been what we would call the kind of objective, long-form journalism.
Not.
I mean, even in this country, which we could say that we kind of pioneered the idea of objective journalism, this is a very new thing, relatively speaking, in the history of journalism, right? I mean, you know, going back any time before the 1900s, I mean, that was not objective journalism. That was not journalism as we know it. It was much more the type of journalism that we see in Europe, which is a little bit more partisan. You know, the idea of objective journalism is so new. And that was a revolution.
Yeah.
And we're seeing another revolution right now.
Yeah, we're experiencing one right now in real time.
Yeah.
A complete revolution, owing to a great degree owing to this new technology that is totally transforming how we understand what news is, how it's delivered, how it's consumed, how it influences public policy and laws.
And how much we trust it. You know, there's a trust level there too. Do we trust, how much, you know, we're seeing more and more polls come out that say that people don't trust news, but they might trust it if they heard it from a colleague or a friend or a neighbor. So that kind of return of over-the-fence communication, it might be digital over-the-fence communication now.
And that really speaks to probably one of the hardest things in all of this to figure out moving forward is fact, trust. Because you know how people say, well, the camera never lies. Well, yeah, it does.
Yes, it does.
Number one, it does, and it did when they first existed, based on who had the camera, where the camera was placed. But we are going to see new technologies that make it possible to, and think about photoshopping video in real time. That's coming. That will come. You'll be able to change what you're seeing in a video with a few strokes of a few clicks of some buttons or whatever. Put this person in there instead of that person. So we're going to get to a point where we can't really trust a picture. You can't trust a picture now because of Photoshop. And we will get to a point where you necessarily can't immediately trust video as well, because we'll be able to change that too.
So this makes the idea of liveness that much more important. If it's live, unless we develop a technology that can manipulate something that goes
And you know
out
we will.
immediately. Yeah.
It really does. The future really, it's tough because then what are people going to believe? Mm-hmm. What are people going to believe? And
Yeah.
of course, when you look at gaming and the creation of virtual worlds, you and I were talking about earlier, that when you can map a virtual world onto a landscape like they're doing with Pokemon Go, what's real anymore?
Yeah, I mean, we don't nowadays in the media studies world, we don't talk about offline and online. We don't use those terms anymore because they don't really exist. How is your online world any different than your offline world?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of
But you
people
remember back in the 90s, we would say, go online.
Oh, yeah.
Go
Yeah.
online. That was a phrase.
I
you
am
know, you would
online,
dial up.
I am offline.
Right, there was a
Yeah.
distinction.
Yeah.
Now we're always online.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So again, it's food for thought for a lot of people in my profession, but it should be food for thought for everybody anyone who engages with a mobile device, with a computer, with a bank machine.
Right. These are things we
with
need
a security
to be thinking
camera.
about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Let's take a quick break. There's more that I want to ask you about. We're talking with Chris Alley. He is a professor of media studies at the University of Virginia. I'm Coy Barefoot. We'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking with Chris Alley. He's in the Department of Media Studies at the University of Virginia. Chris, as you and your colleagues look out across the landscape of media and journalism, aside from some of the issues that we were just talking about a few minutes ago, what do you see happening that you're paying attention to very closely, you and your colleagues, that you think most Americans aren't necessarily aware of, but we should be aware of? What are you watching? What developments are you looking at that you want us to know about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, one of the things that I've been really paying attention to, and it's again this kind of cyclical thing that happens every once in a while, is this question of who owns what. And I think it's going to become a hot button issue. I mean, it was a hot button issue a few years ago when we found out that Comcast bought NBCU or wanted to buy NBC Universal. But I think more and more we're going to find that it's impacting our local journalism quite a lot. We're seeing this with newspapers, for instance. I mean, at one point, local newspapers were being gobbled up. Now they're being sold off. Then they got gobbled up again. And the question of which newspapers will survive, not even just technologically, but because of ownership changes.
Right.
You know, could we be seeing a local paper fold just because its parent company can't pay the bills anymore? For television stations, are we going to see television stations combined? So we're going to see literally fewer television stations in this country for the first time in decades.
So you think that's coming?
I absolutely
sooner
think
rather
it's
than
coming.
later.
Yeah.
The rollback of the expansion of television broadcasting in America.
I absolutely think
And
it's
what do we point to and say, well, this is to blame? Is it the economy, the shrinking economy, or the non-growing economy, or whatever we want to call it?
Well, I think that it's a couple of things. I think that audiences are changing. We no longer, have appointment television. You don't need to watch something at a certain particular hour, although that's different when it comes to news, right? I mean, we still like the 6 p.m. newscast, but that audience who likes the 6 p.m. newscast or the 10 p.m. newscast are also getting older.
Yeah, they're aging out.
They're
right?
aging out, and so we're seeing more and more examples of people cutting the cord, as they say, getting rid of your cable subscription, just streaming everything online.
That's what I did.
You often can't stream local news online, though. Or you're getting it in little snippets, maybe. You're not getting that newscast. So we're seeing advertisers pull out of television and of newspapers, I mean, the one medium that's doing quite well still, though, is radio. We always seem to have, because we're always going to drive, right? The second thing is a legal issue. We're seeing, when we first had television stations in the country in the 50s, they were given a piece of the spectrum, right? They broadcast on a frequency. Like, that's why we had bunny ears. And now the Federal Communications Commission has said to some stations across the country, hey, we'll pay you millions of dollars for that very valuable real estate you've got in the sky, the kind of spectrum, and we're going to sell it to mobile companies for faster data. So if you surrender a little bit of that chunk of spectrum you have, if you sell it to us, you'll make some money.
So from a pure business perspective, just raw capitalism, a company can make more money selling off the spectrum that once served a television broadcast. Now it's just going to make it possible for you to download video faster on your phone.
Yeah, but you're not getting the same,
the TV broadcast will disappear.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think we're going to start to see, I mean, we're in the process of this unfolding right now, but I think we're going to start to see a couple of television stations go off the air. Literally, I mean, off the air. They might be on cable. You might be able to still get them on cable, right? But
yeah.
For that 19% of Americans who still get their television the old school way.
Is that what it is? About 1 out of 5 are still
maybe,
over the airwaves?
You know what? No, that's actually a little bit. Although it's growing now, so the number is a little bit in flux. But I'd say we could comfortably point to maybe 10%. Of Americans who are particularly low income, particularly minority communities, who still get their television the old school way. Their television landscape's going to change dramatically.
Wow. And that's going to have an impact not just in big urban areas, but in markets all across the country, in Harrisburg, Charlottesville, Danville, no matter where you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the statistics I was recently reading is the question of there are a number of communities where, particularly, again, these small market communities that, their major source of television is the public broadcasting station. Now, we all know that public TV is starved for cash, so there's a big incentive for them to sell that spectrum and then only go to cable. But what happens to those people who don't have cable? Yeah. They don't get the station anymore.
So we're not talking about necessarily going out of business.
No, we're not.
It's still in business, but it's just not broadcasting. It's just getting out its content in a digital way.
In a digital way, yeah. So, again, this change in technology has brought about literally the way that we consume kind of one of the staples of our life, which is television.
Yeah.
And these stations that have served us for 50, 60 years.
And because of all of this, I don't think we've been at a point in American history where local news was more important than it is now, because as all the stuff we've been talking about, these changing technologies, this revolution in our understanding of journalism and how it functions and what it is and what it does, local news is more important than it has ever been. It's critical.
I completely agree. And I think this is where, we often get we have to say that there's a difference between local information, of which there is an abundance of. I mean, you can go online to, Charlottesville municipal government and find out what's going on in the city, what your taxes are, if you've got a parking ticket.
They have their own TV channel on cable.
Yeah. We've got an abundance of information about where we live. But what we don't have is a lot of local news, as in people telling us these stories.
Right.
And that is what's in jeopardy here with these changes in who owns what.
And that's the important distinction, information versus news. And I can tell you from my experience as somebody who started getting involved in local Charlottesville news in the late 80s, that's absolutely 100% correct. I mean, I could go back to a point in the mid-90s where there were more newspapers, there was certainly more investigative journalism going on.
Yeah.
Absolutely, much more than there is today.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that investigative journalism is incredibly expensive and takes up a lot of room. It's usually long form, either as a report on television or literally a lot of room in a newspaper.
Takes much more time to do. Yep.
And it may not pay off, right? You could investigate a story for a while and not, so it kind of violates the idea of the 24-hour news cycle, that kind of long form investigative journalism. But
history isn't shy about telling us that that's absolutely critical to citizens controlling their government, to a well-functioning, healthy democracy. It's critical. It's got to be there, and not just at the national or the world level, but it should be there at the local level as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we still need to know, not just things like weather, but we need to know who to vote for at the local level, right? I mean, even our national politics, we still vote at the local level. So this basic thing that is so central to our democracy is something that we take absolutely for granted, which is local news.
Yeah.
And this is where we're seeing a crisis. When we talk about the crisis of journalism.
Right.
It's a crisis.
Look
of
no
local
further
news.
than your own backyard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much
for the work you do. Hi, I'm Coy Barefoot, and I am standing here in the parking lot of Norcross Station condominiums in downtown Charlottesville in the Garrett Square neighborhood. So we're just south of the downtown mall, literally just on the other side of the railroad tracks. This parking lot used to be the home of Marguerite de Crescioli's brothel, Charlottesville's most infamous home of ill repute, which was quite popular with University of Virginia students in the first part of the 20th century. Marguerite was of Canadian and American Indian descent. She opened her brothel in 1922. After a raid by city police, Marguerite's was closed down in 1949, and she passed away in 1951. Her home thereafter became a house for the elderly. In November of 1972, as a part of a citywide urban renewal project that razed much of this historic neighborhood, Marguerite's brothel was torn down, a victim of the wrecking ball. But when that wrecking ball started to hit the walls of the old brothel, they say that money started wafting through the air. And the word quickly got out that the ladies of Marguerite's had hidden money in the walls. Within a few days, there were over 100 people digging through the rubble of Marguerite's, all hoping to find treasure. There was even a rumor that a teenage girl had found $8,000 locked in a metal box under a rock at Marguerite's, which wasn't true. In fact, there were just a few dollars of coins that were found buried in the rubble at Marguerite's. I'm Coy Barefoot. You can find the complete archive of our program online at mediaandcitizenship.org. Have a terrific week, and y'all be good to each other.